The small hotel room was shrouded in darkness, pierced only by a thin sliver of light slanting through the curtains from the city night outside. Breathless gasps, fragmented whispers. The world sharpened to a fever pitch for Ivy as her back pressed against the cold wall, Daniel's hands trembling slightly at her waist. 2 buttons of his shirt had already come undone. His breath was hot on her skin. In that moment, just one more step and there would be no return. Every rule and boundary outside this door had vanished, leaving only 2 lovers trembling on the edge, ready to cross the final forbidden line. "Ivy, are you sure?" Daniel's voice was hoarse, thick with need, each word tumbling between heavy breaths, his eyes filled with pleading and helplessness, as if all that was right and decent in this world was slipping away beneath his feet. Ivy didn't answer. She simply pulled him closer, her hand sliding around his neck, their lips meeting in a desperate, hurried kiss, clinging to each fleeting second of darkness. The air between them was thick with tension. Anticipation, guilt, longing, all knotted together, transforming the tiny room into a universe meant for just the 2 of them. Outside, car horns and rain blurred together, the city's sounds dissolving against the rapid thud of their hearts, their bodies quivering with hope and fear. They knew, with just one more heartbeat, every boundary would be crossed. There would be no way back from this. But here, right now, neither of them wanted to stop anymore. That small hotel room, where the 2 of them now trembled on the edge of forbidden passion, still carried the lingering taste of the past, the emotions thought to have been buried for a decade. But to reach this night, everything had started with that evening. The 10-year class reunion back in their hometown. That summer, Ivy Bennett returned to the town where she had grown up, a quiet little place by the river, where every street led back to the old high school with its long hallways shaded by the blossoms of flamboyant trees. Ivy had just graduated from university, carrying with her a touch of youthful pride and an undercurrent of vague anxiety about the uncertain future ahead. 10 years, a number that sounded monumental. But as she stepped through the school's front gate, every memory came rushing back as if it were only yesterday. The school's assembly hall sparkled with lights, classmates gathered, laughter and chatter echoing through a space that felt half strange, half familiar. Ivy picked a deep blue dress, gentle enough not to stand out, but not so plain as to fade among her old friends. She tried to keep her composure as she answered the small talk. Who had gotten married, who was doing what, who still remembered those old days. But truthfully, Ivy was waiting for only one moment: the arrival of Daniel Rowe. Daniel, the literature teacher from years ago, the secret dream of countless schoolgirls in that class, Ivy included. Back then, Daniel was an untouchable figure. Intellectual, elegant, with a calm aura, yet every now and then, a spark of humor that made him irresistibly charming. Ivy could still remember every subtle nod, each fleeting, meaningful glance he'd sent her way in the crowded classroom. Many nights, she had even imagined what it would be like to touch that hand, the one that held chalk against the blackboard, the one that returned her essays with gentle, insightful remarks. 10 years had passed, Ivy had changed. But Daniel, was he still the same? She asked herself this, both excited and anxious. Her heart was a storm of memories and new desires, an intricate mix of the innocence left from when she was 17 and the boldness of a woman stepping into adulthood. And then Daniel appeared, nothing fancy, just a tall, slender figure with a touch of gray at his temples, a tasteful gray suit, and the same gentle smile as always. But when his eyes found Ivy in the crowd, he seemed to pause just a moment too long. Friends old and new gathered around Daniel, all eager to greet him, to ask after his life. Ivy stood silent in the sea of people, suddenly realizing she was no longer the little schoolgirl she used to be. The moment their eyes met, neither of them spoke a word. Daniel simply nodded, lips curving into a faint, wistful smile, while Ivy's heart skipped a beat, just as it had years ago when she'd been caught daydreaming in class. All the polite conversations, clinking glasses, and bursts of laughter drifted by Ivy like a distant wind. She heard nothing but the beat of her own heart and felt Daniel's gaze following her every move. At the end of the night, as people began to drift away, Ivy happened, perhaps by accident, perhaps not, to step out onto the balcony behind the hall. The night air was cool, scented faintly with jasmine. She stood there alone, gazing at the town lights reflected on the faraway river. Memories from long ago surfaced, sweet and aching, and she thought about a youth where she had never dared speak her true feelings. Suddenly, a warm, deep voice sounded behind her. "Ivy, you still love looking at the night, don't you?" Ivy turned to see Daniel standing quietly behind her. There was no one else watching, no more teacher-student roles, just two old souls, side by side on a cramped balcony. "I never thought I'd see you here," Ivy replied, trying to keep her voice steady though her heart hammered in her chest. Daniel smiled, and this time his eyes no longer hid anything. For a moment, they stood in silence, neither wanting to break the delicate atmosphere. Then Daniel spoke, his voice gentle as ever, but with an undercurrent of emotion Ivy had never heard before. "The truth is, I've always wondered how you've been all these years." Such a simple line, but it pulled Ivy straight back to when she was 17. Back then, she had written Daniel a letter she never sent, hidden in her desk drawer all through senior year. That letter lived on in her memory, every word and every line a portrait of innocent longing. That night, surrounded by the hum of insects and dim lights, Ivy and Daniel talked for hours. At first, only about the old days. Classes, exams, the mischief, and the students who had made an impression on Daniel. But the more they talked, the more intimate the mood became. Daniel shared about his life. Now divorced, living alone, still teaching, still in love with literature, but often feeling empty inside. Ivy spoke of her university years, her first struggles with adulthood, but kept her real feelings hidden, not daring to reveal how much she had missed him. A cool wind drifted through. Ivy shivered. Daniel took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, a simple gesture, but one that closed the distance between them more than anything else. In that instant, Ivy realized she was no longer in control. Daniel's gaze was no longer that of a teacher, but of a man with genuine desire. They both fell silent, but it was the silence of feelings too big to name. Ivy looked up at Daniel, their eyes meeting in the darkness. She didn't know what gave her courage, maybe a little wine, maybe longing that had waited too long, or maybe just the absence of anyone else to stop them. And then, almost unconsciously, Ivy stepped closer to Daniel. Now, the distance between them was measured only in breaths. Daniel didn't retreat, nor did he move forward. He simply stood there, waiting. Ivy tilted her face up, lips trembling as she whispered, "Was it a question or a confession?" "Did you ever think about me?" Daniel looked at Ivy for a long time. In that moment, Ivy saw every wall inside him crumble. And when Daniel's lips brushed her forehead, a touch so gentle, yet more powerful than any kiss Ivy had ever known, She understood that nothing would ever be the same again. A stolen kiss, hurried but burning, reaching deep into the years of suppressed longing and secret memory. That was the first kiss of that fateful night, the unspoken declaration that a forbidden journey was about to begin. One where Ivy and Daniel would step together into the shadowland between right and wrong, desire and conscience. After that night, Ivy couldn't sleep at all. She tossed and turned in the little hotel bed, Daniel's scent still clinging to her hair, his coat wrapped around her shoulders. Her mind spun with 100 unanswered questions, her nerves alive with a cocktail of anticipation and fear, yearning to see Daniel again, yet terrified of what might happen next. The following morning, Ivy woke early, wandering the familiar streets of the small town. From a distance, she saw Daniel, quiet as ever, seated outside a cafe, reading just as he used to years ago. Ivy hesitated, but finally walked in, ordered a coffee, and sat across from him. They exchanged glances, shy but burning, filling the little space with forbidden tension. No one spoke first, their eyes told the story for them. And Ivy realized that sometimes, everything that happens in life is for a reason. And maybe, just maybe, that fateful night was the beginning of days she would never forget. The days after the reunion slipped by like a half-remembered dream, part reality, part fantasy. Ivy returned to the city, still clutching the jacket Daniel had draped over her shoulders that night, never for a moment able to shake off the memory of his gaze, his breath, or that rushed kiss on the dark balcony. She kept rereading those first polite messages, her chest tightening with forbidden longing each time Daniel Rowe's name appeared on her screen. "Thank you for staying and talking last night." Daniel's message arrived the next morning. Just that, no question mark, no obvious innuendo, but Ivy knew perfectly well it was no ordinary courtesy from an old teacher. She replied, palms damp with sweat as she typed each word. "I still haven't returned your jacket, you know." Daniel replied instantly, adding a subtle line. "If you remember, let's have coffee together sometime." Ivy sat on her bed, staring at the messages, mind in a whirl. Meeting again, it was a thought both sweet and dangerous. But her heart raced, trembling with every new exchange, each virtual touch on her phone, as if she were 17 again, dreaming about Daniel. Forbidden tension slipped into every message, every emoji and hesitant phrase, turning every conversation into something soaked in hope and fear. They arranged to meet at a small cafe, tucked away at the end of an old street where Ivy used to come during high school. Daniel arrived first, reading quietly with strands of silver threading through his hair, making him even more captivating. When Ivy entered, their eyes met briefly, then darted away, as if worried someone might discover the secret blooming between them. Daniel pulled out a chair for Ivy, asked a few questions about work and life, but neither of them really cared for the answers. They spoke more with their eyes than with words, her gaze always shimmering with longing, his face trying to stay calm but his lips, his hands, giving him away in every small movement. Ivy loved the way Daniel looked at her, loved the feeling of being hidden away from the world, just the two of them in this small universe. She told him about the sleepless nights after the reunion, about the scent of his jacket lingering in her hair, about the uneasy thrill of seeing his reflection in her mirror every morning. Daniel listened in silence, his eyes growing brighter with every confession, until Ivy leaned in and whispered, "Did you miss me?" Daniel didn't answer with words. Instead, his hand slipped onto hers under the table, a subtle, secret touch that sent shivers through her. They sat there, fingers entwined beneath the table, exchanging stolen glances amidst the crowd. Forbidden tension whirled around them. Even the smallest gesture made both their hearts pound with anticipation. They agreed to meet again, this time at the old school library. Ivy made an excuse about visiting her alma mater, and Daniel arranged a free afternoon to walk her down sunlit corridors. Their footsteps echoed through the empty building, accompanied only by their whispers and the faint scent of old paper, wood, and sunlight. Ivy walked close beside Daniel, letting her shoulder brush his sleeve now and then, at once nervous and hungry for more. In a quiet corner, Daniel stopped and looked at Ivy for a long moment, a gaze heavy with regret and yearning, so fragile between right and wrong. "If someone saw us," Daniel said softly, voice trembling. "Let them think whatever they want," Ivy replied, braver than ever. Daniel smiled, revealing at last the longing he had buried for years. This time, Ivy took the lead. She drew Daniel into a shadowed alcove between old bookshelves and faint light. Their lips found each other, no longer the timid kisses of youth but the beginning of a storm. Her lips soft and insistent on his, her tongue seeking out his breath deep in his throat. Daniel wrapped his arms around Ivy's waist, pulling her close, his hands daring to roam beyond old boundaries. They kissed hungrily in the darkness, the rules of the past fading to distant echoes. Ivy felt every racing heartbeat, every fierce squeeze of Daniel's arms around her. When Daniel broke the kiss, his eyes had grown wild and dark, laced with fear and burning desire. "You know this is wrong, right?" Daniel gasped. "I don't care anymore," Ivy whispered, her fingers threading through his hair, drawing him back in. Forbidden tension exploded, cresting past all restraint. Daniel's hands slid for the first time along her back, feeling the heat of her skin through the thin fabric. Ivy shuddered, the fire of his touch melting every ounce of reason, making her crave more, crave the total shattering of every old rule. Daniel buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her hair, hands trembling now not from fear, but from overwhelming desire. Footsteps echoed down the end of the hall, making them break apart. Ivy pressed herself against the bookshelf, heart thundering as if it might burst, while Daniel froze, his eyes wide with the panic of almost letting go completely. The forbidden tension only grew stronger, the sense of being watched, of danger, making them even less able to stop. From that day forward, Ivy and Daniel began a series of secret messages, clandestine meetings charged with both thrill and fear. Daniel's late-night texts always hinted at longing. "Are you awake? I still haven't forgotten the sweetness of your lips." Ivy replied without hesitation. "If you miss me, see me tomorrow. I can't stand it anymore." The forbidden tension stretched through every text, every midnight call. Daniel kept reminding himself to stop, but every time Ivy's name lit up his phone, his reason dissolved. Ivy knew she was sinking deeper into a dangerous darkness, but the farther she went, the more she wanted to claim Daniel entirely, not as a former teacher, but as the first man to set her on fire. One evening, Ivy used the excuse of a walk to meet Daniel at a bar on the edge of town. No longer shy, she leaned into his shoulder, uncaring of the jealous, curious eyes of strangers. Daniel bent close to her ear, whispering words meant for her alone. "Do you really want this to keep going?" Ivy smiled, her hand sliding onto Daniel's thigh beneath the table, a silent dare to every boundary. They both laughed quietly, shivering with the forbidden tension cresting between them, knowing they had just crossed another line, the line of secrecy, hunger, and the promise that the nights ahead would be even more dangerous. That night, Ivy got a message. "If you want, come to my apartment tomorrow night." And she knew tomorrow would be the first night they had nothing left to hide. That night, Ivy stood in front of Daniel's apartment door, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might break through her chest. The hallway of the old apartment building was silent, yellow light flickering on the worn tile floor, her footsteps echoing as she walked. She paused before the familiar white wooden door, took a deep breath, and knocked, 3 soft taps, as if she feared the very air might sense the forbidden longing trembling on the other side. The door opened. Daniel stood there in a dark shirt, his angular jaw roughened with an enticing trace of stubble. His eyes flashed with something wild, something wary. He said nothing, simply pulled Ivy inside, closing the door quietly behind her, as if shutting out all the world's noise for just the two of them. In the small room, warm yellow light spilled across the wood floor. Ivy stood still for a moment, breathing in the familiar scents: coffee, old books, and that faint trace of Daniel's cologne she remembered from her school days. The distance between them was less than a step, yet the forbidden tension in the air stretched taut as a wire. Ivy trembled, partly from nerves, mostly from anticipation that had built too long. Daniel gazed at Ivy for a long moment, his hand brushing her cheek. In his eyes was a storm of emotion, desperate to hold on to reason, yet utterly unable to resist the desire burning inside. His voice came out low and rough. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Ivy didn't answer with words. She wrapped her arms around Daniel's neck, pulling him down until his breath mingled with hers. Their first kiss in that small room was nothing like the hurried, stolen kiss on the balcony. It was deep, consuming, carrying everything unsaid from the last 10 years. Daniel clung to Ivy, his hands finally bold enough to plunge through her hair, along her nape, down her spine, drawing her close against his solid body. Ivy gasped for breath, feeling the beat of Daniel's heart thunder against her chest. Clothes were no longer a barrier. Every button, every strip of fabric slipped away from bare skin, every scorching kiss left sinful marks along her neck and across Ivy's pale shoulders. Soft light from the ceiling painted shadows across their entwined bodies on the narrow bed. Daniel was gentle, unhurried, as if he wanted to imprint every sensation onto Ivy's skin, from the long, lingering kiss down to her collarbone to the tight embrace that made her tremble. Ivy answered him with all the hunger she'd hidden for so long, letting Daniel guide her through every swell and dip of pleasure, with no more shyness, no more restraint. Lost in their passion, all boundaries seemed to melt away. Ivy threw her head back, her lips parting in small, breathy moans, partly from embarrassment, partly an invitation. Daniel never looked away, his hands exploring Ivy's body for the first time, tracing her slim waist, sliding over her soft hips, gripping her bare thighs as they trembled under his fervent touch. Ivy pulled Daniel even closer, welcoming every movement, every heat and shudder they shared. The room filled with breathless gasps, the creak of the mattress, a symphony of forbidden desire that belonged to them alone. Ivy never imagined she could be so bold, so unafraid to reveal her craving, letting Daniel see just how fragile and how fierce she could be. When they finally reached the very peak of their passion, Daniel bent close and whispered against Ivy's ear, "I've never wanted anyone the way I want you." Those words, combined with his arms holding her tight, made Ivy break into tears at the moment of climax. Tears of release, of 10 years longing and regret, all that forbidden tension bursting into a fire that could never be smothered again. Daniel cradled her close, whispering apologies, promises, declarations of love between wild, tangled kisses. The two of them stayed wrapped in each other's arms all night, no longer caring whether it was day or night outside. Only knowing that right now they belonged to each other, no matter what was right or wrong. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, tracing a line along Ivy's bare back as she curled against Daniel's chest. She opened her eyes, found Daniel still beside her, his expression a mix of lingering disbelief and happiness. Ivy brushed her fingers gently over his cheek, smiling as he stirred and pulled her closer. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice deep and rough from a sleepless night. "I've never felt more alive than I do right now," Ivy whispered, her lips pressing softly to his chest. Daniel smiled, burying his face in Ivy's hair, inhaling the scent that lingered on her skin. It was a rare, fragile moment of peace before the storm of forbidden love would sweep them away again. Ivy left the bed, slipped on Daniel's shirt, and stepped onto the balcony to watch the city waking up. She thought about the night they'd just shared, the pleasure, the tears, the fierce embrace that felt like it might never end. But deep down, she knew, from this moment on, there was no turning back. She had fallen far too deeply into that sweet, shadowy world where Daniel was the only light and also the sharpest blade pressed to her heart. Daniel came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. They looked at each other in the window's reflection, both of them with eyes that still burned with desire, still glimmered with fear. Daniel spoke quietly, as if to himself, "Will we be okay?" Ivy didn't answer. She simply leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, closing her eyes to ride the waves of emotion that were both soaring and haunting. From that night on, Ivy and Daniel became addicted to each other, addicted to the forbidden, addicted to pleasure, addicted to the thrill of every secret meeting. They couldn't stop, even as they knew that each rendezvous, each sleepless night, was bringing them closer to the edge. Every night brought a message from Daniel. Every day Ivy waited with anxious longing, always afraid someone might discover their secret. And it was this very forbidden love, the deeper it grew, the more intoxicating it became, that drew them closer and closer to danger than ever before. After those fevered, sleepless nights together, Ivy and Daniel entered a time full of contradictions. The deeper they fell for each other, the more terrified they became. They feared that someday their secret would be exposed, feared that every watchful eye out there would turn their love into a joke, a sin that could never be forgiven. Each morning, Ivy woke with the lingering touch of Daniel's hands on her skin, faint purple marks on her neck, still hearing his whispered words from the night before. But happiness was now shadowed by growing anxiety. Their meetings were becoming harder to hide, the forbidden tension between them burning ever hotter. But outside, small cracks were beginning to show. One late afternoon, Ivy stood hidden behind the curtain in Daniel's apartment, freshly showered, wearing only his long shirt, bare feet on the cold wooden floor. She heard Daniel's voice from the living room. On the other end of the call was Rachel, Ivy's best friend, recently returned from the city. "Yeah, I've got something tonight. Maybe I'll swing by the school tomorrow." "No, I'm fine, just a bit busy, that's all." Ivy suppressed a sigh and stepped out. Daniel looked at her, worry still flickering in his eyes. Ivy moved close, wrapping her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his warm back. But when her hands started to drift lower, Daniel turned to face her, pulling her into a deep kiss as if to erase all their fear for just a moment. "Don't worry," Daniel murmured, his fingers tracing down Ivy's back, "as long as we're careful." But deep down, Daniel wasn't so sure. He knew that just one careless mistake would bring everything crashing down. That evening, Ivy left as dusk fell. She slipped out the back entrance, hood up, hoping no one would notice. But the moment she stepped onto the street, she spotted Rachel sitting at a cafe across the road, her friend's startled gaze making Ivy freeze for a few seconds. "Ivy, what a coincidence, I thought you were still in the city." Ivy fumbled to hide her damp hair and the oversized man's coat over her nightdress, stammered out some excuse, trying her best to act casual. Rachel watched Ivy for a long time, her eyes seeming to see right through every layer of pretense. "Are you okay? You've seemed different lately." Ivy forced a smile and made a quick excuse to leave, but all the way home she couldn't stop shivering, the sense of being watched, of suspicious eyes trailing her every step. At the same time, at school, Daniel was also becoming the talk of the staff room. Ms. Sloane, the other literature teacher, had started to notice Daniel coming in late, faint scratch marks on his neck and wrists, and those messages he received during lunch breaks that made him smile to himself. One day, as Daniel scrolled his phone under his desk, Ms. Sloane suddenly walked in, glancing just in time to see a message flash on his screen. "I miss you. Wait for me tonight, Ivy." "Ms." Sloane frowned, a mix of suspicion and something like jealousy flickering in her eyes. Daniel pretended to be nonchalant, but his heart pounded, sweat beading on his forehead. That night, Daniel told Ivy about what was happening at school, and they laughed, but their laughter was tinged with a bitterness neither could ignore. Ivy curled into Daniel's arms in bed, their bodies seeking comfort in each other, trying to find solace in every breath, every lingering touch, in those moments where it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Forbidden tension was no longer just a thrill, it was a blend of passion and fear, a longing to possess each other and a dread of losing everything. That weekend, Ivy and Daniel decided to get away, meeting in the suburbs at a small homestay nestled in the pine woods, hoping it would be safe, unknown. But forbidden love was never truly safe. They rented a little attic room, windows looking out over a silent forest, the last of the sunset pouring golden light across the space. Ivy wore a sheer nightgown, hair tumbling down her back, her eyes sparkling with both innocence and rebellion. Daniel came up behind her, kissing along her neck, his hands slowly tugging her dress down over her white skin. The sound of ragged breaths, rustling fabric, Ivy's soft moans mingled with the wind in the trees, every sense ablaze in the unfamiliar air. Daniel lifted Ivy onto the table, stripping away each layer, his hot mouth finding every familiar curve of her body. Ivy bit her lip to stifle her cries, but every thrust, every movement from Daniel shattered her control. That night, they lost themselves in each other, giving in to pleasure and the ever-present shadow of guilt. When the storm subsided, Daniel leaned back against the headboard, pulling Ivy to rest on his chest. They sat in silence, each lost in thought. Ivy traced the red scratches on Daniel's chest, her voice soft and sad. "If this all comes out, will you regret it?" Daniel hugged Ivy tightly, whispering into her hair. "I don't know, I just know without you, nothing means anything." Ivy bit her lip, tears slipping down onto Daniel's chest, mixing with the sweat of their fierce lovemaking. The forbidden tension between them had reached its peak, no way back, only the abyss ahead. Just a week later, Rachel sent Ivy an odd message. We need to talk. Meet me at the old cafe tomorrow afternoon. Ivy sat staring at the screen, her heart tightening with a sense of impending doom. Somewhere out there, the secret she shared with Daniel was being hunted, ready to be dragged into the light at any moment. And in that instant, Ivy realized their forbidden love would no longer be a secret kept just between two hearts. Rachel's message left Ivy restless all night. She couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in the empty bed, clutching Daniel's shirt as if it were a piece of memory being ripped from her grasp. Every message, every recent phone call made her jump with anxiety. Outside, the rain kept falling, and the unease inside her grew with no end in sight. The next afternoon, Ivy entered the old cafe. Rachel was already waiting in a shadowed corner, her face cold, so unlike her usual warmth. Tension thickened the air around their table. Ivy forced a smile, but Rachel just pushed a stack of photos toward her, blurry, hurried shots. Ivy slipping out of Daniel's apartment at midnight, her eyes full of worry. A man's coat thrown over her nightdress. Rachel stared at Ivy for a long time before finally speaking, her voice shaking with both anger and heartbreak. I have to ask, who are you seeing? Don't lie, I know who it is. There was no way for Ivy to deny it. She lowered her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Rachel stood up without another word, leaving Ivy alone in the suffocating quiet of their old haunt, guilt tightening around her neck like an invisible noose. The very next day, Ms. Sloane called Daniel into the office. On the desk was a file and a few anonymous printed messages, including screenshots of his and Ivy's ambiguous chats, annotated with cruel remarks. Daniel, you need to be careful. At this school, this can't be ignored. If what I've heard is true, you know what the consequences will be. Daniel sat frozen, his hands clenched white. He left school early that day, driving like he was fleeing something, the only thing in his mind the image of Ivy, her teary eyes, trembling lips, all those forbidden moments now a crushing weight on his chest. That evening, Ivy sat waiting for Daniel in the living room, yellow lamplight casting long shadows on the walls. The air felt thick with worry and pain. When Daniel finally came in, they just looked at each other, unable to speak. Ivy broke down, running into his arms, her lips seeking comfort even as her heart screamed with despair. Daniel held Ivy tightly, his voice a broken whisper. I'm sorry, I dragged you into this. I'm not worthy of your love. Ivy kissed him through her tears, the salt mixing with Daniel's feverish lips. They clung to each other, desperate, wild, as if it might be their last time. Every touch was frenzied, every kiss tinged with pain and longing and the ache of regret. Daniel undressed Ivy, his hands tracing every familiar curve, his mouth exploring the skin that had haunted his dreams for so many nights. Ivy clung to his shoulders, her body trembling with more than just pleasure, fear, regret, sorrow all rising like a tide that threatened to swallow her. Ivy's moans echoed through the small room, tangled with gasps and sobs. Daniel held her tighter, driving them both to the edge, loving her and almost begging for forgiveness in the same breath. The forbidden tension became a storm, sweeping them out of the world, leaving behind every judgment, every whisper, everything they'd ever known about right and wrong. After the storm passed, Ivy curled in Daniel's arms, her tears still wet on her cheeks. In a voice as soft as breath, she asked, "If you had to choose, what would you pick, me or everything else?" Daniel was silent for a long time, staring into space. He knew this wasn't just his question, it belonged to both of them. Ivy wept, sobbing into his chest, searching for some last shred of peace amid the chaos of their lives. The next day, everything unraveled even faster than Ivy had feared. Her mother called, voice choked with both anguish and rage. Rumors spread all over their small town, students gossiped, colleagues turned away from Daniel. The stares, the whispers, drove both of them nearly mad. Daniel submitted his resignation and left the school. Ivy hid in their apartment, afraid to step outside. Every night, they just held each other tight, sharing kisses wet with tears, making promises neither knew if they could keep. One night in the dark, Ivy asked, "Maybe we should end it, Daniel. I'm scared." Daniel clung to her, almost pleading. "Without you, there's nothing left for me to lose." They held each other through the night, as if clinging to the last fragile thread before the fall. Forbidden love had been dragged into the light. They had nothing left to hide, and no idea how to fix what had broken. Yet amid the wreckage, their love only burned fiercer, wilder, like two people drowning, refusing to let go of each other. And in that moment of despair, Ivy realized, maybe it was time to make a choice. To dive in, no matter what, or to accept losing each other forever. After those long weeks hiding in the shadows, Ivy felt as though she had lived an entire lifetime in just a handful of days. The small, once familiar town had become a maze of prying eyes, cruel whispers, and a suffocating despair that seeped into every restless dream. Daniel, too, was visibly changed, his face thinner, eyes no longer burning with old fire but shrouded in gray, haunted by worry and regret. He'd handed in his resignation, closed his apartment, severed ties with almost every colleague and old friend. Only Ivy remained by his side, despite her mother's anger, friends who had turned away, and a world that seemed to have abandoned them both. But in that darkness, amid all the loss, something remarkable happened. Their love didn't fade. If anything, it grew, stubborn, unyielding, fiercer than ever. One quiet autumn morning, as sunlight crept softly into the room, Ivy rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, listening to his heartbeat mingle with the birdsong outside. She realized she'd never felt so happy, even with the storm of life still raging just beyond their walls. Daniel took Ivy's hand, and for the first time in weeks, his eyes blazed with resolve and love. "We've lost everything, Ivy. So what's left to be afraid of?" Ivy looked at him for a long moment and saw, not her strict old teacher, not her childhood idol, but simply a man, her man, willing to face any loss to keep their love alive. Together, they made a choice. No more running, no more hiding, no more letting anyone or anything decide their fate. Ivy posted a photo of her and Daniel on social media. Not a sexy, showy picture, but a simple shot of them sitting side by side on the front steps, sunlight in their tangled hair, looking into each other's eyes and smiling. The caption was nothing but a simple line, "We choose each other." Messages, calls, and comments crashed in like a tidal wave. Some mocked, some pitied, some quietly blocked her, others severed ties outright. Ivy's mother cried for days, but in the end, simply sighed, hugging her daughter once before letting go. Even the closest friends slowly drifted away, leaving a space both painful and strangely freeing. Yet amid the chaos, Ivy and Daniel felt lighter. No longer did they tremble after every date, no longer did they have to dodge glances on the street or hide the faded marks of love on their skin. They could walk hand in hand through the morning market, sip coffee together in public, rebuild their lives from the ground up. On their last night in the old apartment, Ivy and Daniel made love beneath the soft golden lamp, with no more tears, no more apologies, only a gentle but urgent devotion. Ivy, bolder than ever, led Daniel through every pulse of pleasure, leaving his body covered in marks of love, half declaration, half gratitude for surviving the storm together. Daniel pulled her close, whispering into her ear, "I don't know what the future holds. I just know, if I have you, everything is worth trying for." Ivy pressed her cheek to his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling for the first time that she truly belonged to someone. No more hiding, no more fear. A month later, Ivy found a new job in the city. Daniel started teaching at a small center for underprivileged children, their lives gradually settling into a quiet, fragile peace. The world outside had not truly forgiven them. There were still scars, still nights when Ivy cried herself to sleep, still afternoons when Daniel sat silent at the window, eyes lost in thought. But they had made their choice and had no regrets. At the end of their story, Ivy wondered, if she could start over, would she dare fall into forbidden love all over again? Perhaps she would. Because after everything, it was forbidden love that had taught her what it meant to live honestly, to dare to love, and to hold on to someone no matter what. Hand in hand, she and Daniel stepped into the crowded park, into the radiant late autumn sunlight. Prejudices still lingered, gossip had not faded, but in their eyes there was only each other and a future just beginning, not perfect, not easy, but theirs alone, free and shining.